All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another week of Stage Door Medium. I'm Jimmy here, and we've got some fun topics to talk about today. We have an incredible artist here that I'm so excited to speak with, and then we're talking all about hell today because I have a guest who goes there nightly, 8 times a week. Please help me in welcoming Tim Hughes to our show today. Hi, Tim.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you
It's
doing?
good. I'm doing well. It's good to see you.
You
Happy New
too.
Year.
Happy New Year. I know I was so ticked at my spouse last night because I typically set an alarm because I can't stay up. Like I'm such a early riser, and I wake up and it's like 12:02, and I'm like, "Oh, what time is it before midnight?" He's like, "It already hit." And I was so pissed. I was like, "I wanted to see this year out." And I'm like, "Can you let me sleep?" He was like, "I just thought you wanted sleep." So I was luckily I was so tired to be too pissed. I just fell back asleep.
Good, good, good. Yeah, you didn't miss much this one.
No, 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 no. I remember looking at a post of Billy Porter's coat, and that was the last. Did you see it?
I did. It was
Oh,
beautiful.
that coat. Well, we got you here. So, gosh, your Broadway credits include Chaplin, Frozen, Hadestown, and then the movie The Greatest Showman. You have so many credits, but I am such a fan of your work, and I saw Hadestown. It was pretty much right after it opened because I made sure I was like, we have to get tickets because something in my gut was like, it's gonna be nuts after the review came out. And so I
Yeah.
remember I was very fortunate that we got it right before the review hit, before they could spike the spike the prices for like all
Yep.
for premium seats. And it was one of the most revelatory. Like I remember I told you when we first started messaging, I'm still trying to figure out the show. Like I'm still trying to process it. Like that's how incredible the show is.
It's the like richest piece of theater I've ever gotten to be a part of, and experience on a nightly basis. I mean, whenever people are always like, "How do you do it 8 times a week?" It's never been easier than with Hadestown. There's just so much there. There's so much depth. There's so much complexity. There's so many ways to hook into something new each night that I do feel super grateful to be a part of it.
There were so many moments where I remember like that are just branded up here, and then it's funny. I mean, there's so many versions on YouTube, and you always hear the expression to see something on YouTube does not do it obviously justice to seeing it live. And 100. I mean, talk about. I feel like Hadestown is probably the strongest example. Like that is a and I know theater is a communal experience, but to see that show, there is something so. I mean, especially with how Hadestown operates, with Andre the Shields coming out with the okay, or is it all right? Okay, what does he say?
All right.
All right. I mean, the minute I will never forget. It was very similar to Once in the way that it just kind of pulls you in, and you're like, oh, the show is start. You know what I mean? It was just such a
Hmm.
communal. So, and we'll get there, but I'm. Oh, it makes me miss Broadway even more just talking about this with you. So,
Me too.
um,
Me too.
let's go back to young Tim Hughes. How did you get the bug? Like, did you always know that you wanted to do theater?
Um, I'm the youngest of four kids, so it's my sister, then two brothers, then me. And my sister and actually my mother was very musical. She was in a group called the Kim Larks when she was a little girl. And my dad was always very athletic. So it was an interesting combination that I had both an extreme push to be playing basketball and be athletic, and an extreme push to be in music, and not like pushed by my parents, but genetically. I think
Mhm.
just like pulled in both directions. Um, and I did growing up. I did both. I was constantly putting on shows in my basement. I was constantly playing dress up and finding costumes and um, the youngest is always kind of the entertainer, so that worked out, and then the fact that my sister was the oldest also had a musical bug and sang and danced and act. I remember watching her, like, when I must have been 3 or 4 when I first saw her in The Sound of Music, in her middle school, and I remember that.
Mhm.
So I caught that bug early, and then I kind of grew up watching her do high school productions,
Same.
um she always was like my personal director choreographer in my basement productions. Um, and then I also was athletic and playing basketball and soccer and tennis and was good at it. I was very athletic. Um, but I just never it was just pure passion that I had for the arts. And I knew in middle school, or I knew pretty early on that that was pulling me stronger than anything else. Um, and I really just started to commit to it more in high school, and then slowly give up every sport until I was just doing theater. And then, as a kid from Wisconsin, I didn't really know if I could turn my passion into a career. And I went for it and auditioned for colleges and ended up pursuing it at NYU. And that's just set me off on this path that I've been on ever since. But yeah, I've always just loved it. I mean, I've just never been able to turn away from my love for it.
It's funny that you talk about your sister because my sister she's 2 years older than me and very similar track. I did sports growing up, but it was always very, it was always very food driven. I was like, well, maybe if I play baseball, because, the team moms would buy you food when you won. And so I was like, well, maybe, I'll go get ice cream after this. So it was never, it was never like I didn't enjoy it. And I remember I was only put in the outfield and I was like thinking about musicals and like The Wizard of Oz and like Judy Garland at like the tender age of 8 in the outfield and like stomping bees. And my sister and I, we went to a small Catholic grade school and we used to put on like little plays after school, like very dark, like murder mystery, like Lifetime drama plays as children. And then it wasn't until she was in high school and I saw her in Pippin that same thing. I very much was like, oh, and it was so simple. They literally
Who did
just
she play? Who did she play?
Julie was just one of the players. She danced for like 15 years and she's this incredible dancer. And I remember just at one point it was like flash paper or something so silly, but I remember to be that kid in an audience in middle school and like see fire come out of somebody's hand, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, and I was like, oh, like I can't wait to do this. So yeah, my sister and I had a very similar experience to yours where I kind of looked up to her, and she was very much like a guiding inspiration because dancing wasn't my strong suit. So when I struggled with stuff, I could always go to her. And yeah. So, tell me a little bit before we dive into Hadestown. You were also in The Greatest Showman, and I completely forgot about that. I was looking up, I was like, oh, and then you've got your photos with Hugh Jackman. And how did that experience come about for you? And like, what was that like putting that movie together with him and your company?
I had made my debut in Chaplin the musical, and I was cast by Telsey, and I started establishing a solid relationship with that casting company. Um, but the original like planted seed for The Greatest Showman was a dear friend of mine who I went to school with. Who is from Buenos Aires. She moved to LA, was like starting her career there. She's amazing, incredibly talented, and was connected into this like who's who of young artists in LA dinner that she was invited to. And she ends up sitting next to and meeting Michael Gracie, the director of The Greatest Showman, for the first time that she goes to this dinner. And when you meet Michael Gracie, you realize he loves to talk about his projects. He loves to do full like storyboard. This
Yeah.
is what we're going down. Like bring out the computer. And he was about to start casting for The Greatest Showman. So he brings out the presentation of this is what I'm about to do. I'm looking for all of these eccentric triple threat circus type people. And my friend sat next to him and she was like, my friend has to be in your show. And he was like, what? And she was like, you're going to love him. He's going to have to be in your show. So at the time, he was looking for the giant, a very, very tall person who could also do a lot of the singing and dancing. and I kind of put my own stamp on the role of the monster in Young Frankenstein, and I was doing the Putting on the Ritz production number in these like 6-inch platform tap shoes, and I'd done it at Main State, and then I'd done it at the Muni,
In
and
the
I
heat,
was like,
by the way, where it's like 800 degrees and you're in.
oh my God. In layers of costumes in 80-degree weather, like lifting, thank God it was Jen Cody, but like lifting somebody up and walking like a
Yeah.
football field in tap shoes. It was amazing. I loved every second of it. But I did almost pass out like two nights. It was
Sure.
intense. Um, and I was like, oh, I have all of this experience dancing on some form. And I also had done Big Fish twice. So I had been on stilts. Um, so she was like, you're going to love him. Got like kind of planted the seeds in the director's mind. And then Telsey started casting it. And they told my agent, they're like, you're not tall enough. They're looking for somebody who's a real giant. And I was like, I'm not tall enough. Like, I've never gotten that before. And but because I had a relationship with them, they were like, but come in and dance for the rest of the parts. So when I first danced for the director, he assumed that I'd be like, he saw me in a very different light. And then I danced very well in the style with the Ashley Whalen, the choreographer, was bringing to the piece. It just suits my body and my abilities well. And it was a really good fit. And I had already kind of had my foot in the door because my friend had planted a seed. And that's, it's really lucky, but that's sometimes what it takes, is that
Yeah.
like that personal connection. I stayed through the whole process. And there was a crazy amount of budget cuts like near the end, where they were like trying to like narrow down how many new people they were going to bring in to play this small group of oddities. And I think out of this pool, there's supposed to be 12, and I think they brought in 2, and I happened to be one of them. So I was very lucky, but that's the long version of how
Wow.
I got connected to Greatest Showman.
What was the experience like working with Hugh Jackman, working on that set? And it looks crazy, like crazy amazing.
It's amazing, especially coming from like a mostly theater experience. It was incredible to walk into a set that is like 360 the world that you are trying to create.
Yeah.
It's not the the back end of a set piece that's unfinished.
Yeah.
There's no unfinished corner on those sets. It also was so amazing to work with Hugh Jackman. I mean, he's definitely brings his experience of and history in the theater and that sense of community and collaboration to a movie set, which I think is probably going to be unique for my experiences moving forward in the movies. I don't think I'm going to get that a lot, but he brought such a sense of community to this cast, and he just has such a healthy sense of self. He's got such an incredible work ethic. He was a really amazing example for me to see work and then to work with and learn from in The Greatest Showman. It was surreal. I mean, when I first started learning the choreography and heard the music, I was like, this has the potential to be incredible.
Yeah.
And it's unique because a lot of the power feels, the power structures feel different for the movie. Like you learn early on that you don't like get direction and make it your own and then do it 8 times a week. You kind of get direction and then like try a couple of different things, and then the director and the editor decide which one's going to make it. Like your job is expectation is a little bit different. So that whole pace I had to learn pretty quickly, but it was amazing. I mean, I love the friends that I've made, cast and crew. It
Yeah.
was just such a great experience, a great family.
But I mean, even the movie itself, though, is so theatrical in nature that I feel like, when you're talking about transitioning to film, I feel like it was probably a perfect opportunity because, like you said, you have people that have worked extensively in the theater. The feel of it, I mean, like watching it, you almost had like I feel like if you had no experience with The Greatest Showman, or if you're average viewer, you might even have to wonder, was this a musical at one point that they turned into a movie? Or I mean, it's that's how theatrical it is. So
The director has a great appreciation for old school movie musicals, which is what that quality is brought into this movie musical.
you can tell, I mean, with the
Yeah.
rooftop scenes, and there's so many moments. Gosh, I know, such beautiful music. I think I've only seen it once, actually, once in the theaters. So I'm gonna have to watch it again. get you that royalty residual check. I don't know if that.
Disney Plus.
Yes. So let's talk about Hadestown because, and
Yes.
oh gosh, I know we started talking about it earlier, but I have never seen something where I was. I can't tell you the last time I've seen a show where I was so transfixed at the end of Act One, where like, the lights come up and I look at my spouse and like, my eyes had welled up and I'm like, I don't even know. Normally at intermission, I'll know, like, I'll already want to start talking about it. And I'm like, I can't. I'm like, you just have to wait,
Hmm.
for the full show, to come, to come to a close. And I mean, we both were like, this is the greatest thing we've ever seen, like in so many years. Like I've never felt, I don't know. I feel like it's funny. I was just talking about this too with heavier shows. I feel like I'm not able to see them often because they are so heavy. Like falsettos, I could only see once. I haven't watched it again because it's too. Hadestown, I feel like is deep, but it's something that I could see so many times. And
Mm.
like Amber, gosh, like I just her. I felt like, and it's no disrespect to any other castmate, but I could not stop. Like I always pick a character that I just like follow the entire show, and it was her. I mean, I could not get over the performance she was giving, and everyone was at like
Everyone.
150. But is there a particular time frame that we're supposed to think that this world is set in based off the fashion? Because I couldn't peg it.
No.
Okay.
The fashion is specifically drawn from like a lot of different inspirations. Specifically, uh, Persephone's dress is like a combination. I mean, I know that like Dolly Parton was a big inspiration
Get
for
out of
that
here.
dress. But it's, I mean, the costume designer talks about how like the top half feels like a very different era than the bottom half. And
Yeah.
he was like, sometimes when I look at it, I'm like, what is that? Like, what is, what did we create? And it actually feels like a very different inspiration and era than Hades' costumes. Um,
Yeah.
but it's a combination. I mean, there is that steampunk like aesthetic to a lot of it, but it's not consistent. It's definitely eclectic by design.
We were talking before we started rolling about how the show means so many different things to different people. And like, I know what stuck out to me was like, I was so drawn to the fact that the ones that are really the flawed folks in the show are the ones that are either gods or part gods. And and this idea of redemption and, um, for you, what do you carry? Like, how do you walk away from having seen the show, being a part of it? What elements do you really hold close to your heart?
Um, for me, I like really cling to the depictions of the like two individual leaders. Like I think the pegging of Orpheus and Hades is really powerful, and especially in the like our own political climate that we're in. Um, this dictator, like authoritarian like leader, and then this art artsy, full of love, like appealing to individuals as the like the two options for how to lead and what is inspiring these people, the people of the underworld. um, that I think is like just an overarching super powerful theme for me. um, and I think that probably specific to the track that I play, like that's the characters that I interact with or that affect me and the world that I'm living in. Um, but God, I mean, like the personal struggles of with doubt, with following your instinct, with love, with relationships. I mean, there's just so much with climate change. I mean, all of these climate change themes that are in there. It's that's what I was saying, beforehand. Every night it feels like that it like something else is
Yeah.
is the thesis for that night. Like something else stands out to me, because the lyrics and the show is just that complex and layered and rich.
What I loved is, and I'm not giving anything away, but when we do get to the end of the show and the moment happens, right as, and it was fun because I think wherever I was, I could just see that the oil drum was like this close to becoming flush with the stage. You know what the very last moment. And it's funny because you're in that audience and you know what's coming. And every person in that theater still gasped when he turns. It's the most heartbreaking, moment. And gosh, I cannot wait to. I feel like this show, especially post pandemic, about the why we create and the purpose and the role of the arts, and
Hmm.
I think it's going to hit home more deeply. What was your experience like, understudying Hades? And because you went on a couple
Hmm.
times, was it just once?
I think I've been on about 5 or 6 times now. Physically, it's much easier than my own track. I hardly break a sweat comparatively, but it is. It's such an incredible experience, and the creative team led by Rachel has just provided the opportunity to make this track my own, which I'm just incredibly grateful for, and it also feels entirely necessary because there's no way I can do what Patrick Page does. Um, so we started the process of approaching this understudy track from table work, like in a small studio with Rachel, with
Oh, wow.
music directors. So I started like from square one, which is a incredible opportunity for any understudy. Like usually it's like trying to morph yourself into the cookie cutter of what is already exists. And there was very, very little of that. So I got to bring a tremendous um, personal take to Hades, and which, like I said, was important because I can't do vocally what Patrick Page does. Nobody can. I mean, it's very, very rare. He's singing an octave below
I was just going to
what the
ask you
other
that.
what the other understudy and I sing, which is already very low for a bass baritone. Um, so I was ready. Like I was ready to go on. I was Patrick and Reeve were I think the last two to call out. Um, Technically, Reeve still has not missed a show. Uh, his first show out was supposed to be the night that we shut down for the pandemic. It was he went on his vacation, and his understudy was going on. It's such a sad story, but
Oh,
his family was in from California, and then he got to the theater, and we're like, we're shutting down.
is this John?
Um,
Was that John that was
John,
supposed to go
yeah,
on?
yeah. But as far as like how Rachel has approached understudying, and how she's kind of approached a company of actors in general is very empowering. And um, she trusts the people that she hires, and she encourages them to bring a tremendous amount of themselves to every aspect of what they're contributing to the show. And I think that helps create the magic, that like the effervescence of Hadestown, that you have to feel in the room,
Mhm.
because it's something about the energy that so many of us just naturally are giving because we've been given this opportunity, and the opportunity is rare. Sadly, it's sad to say, but like that opportunity to bring so much of yourself to a piece and to be trusted with so much is not the norm for a Broadway show, in my experience.
Absolutely. I guess to piggyback off of this concept of hell. I mean, you and I were talking before we started filming. We both grew up Catholic, and can I ask, like, growing up, did you? Because for me, my notion of hell was like terrifying. Like as a Catholic grade school, like, did you have one? Like, was there one that was like instilled in you from school or from like anything like that?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, I knew pretty early on that I was like the anti-Catholic Catholic. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I always was like kind of eye rolling at the idea of going to church. Um, so if there was ever like a strong image of what hell was, it didn't scare me. Like it wasn't something that like was a determining factor in how I behaved, unfortunately. But I always, at the same time, still felt like there was good and like good and evil in the world, like
Sure.
and I believed in a spirituality that was not connected to going to church and giving a percentage of your paycheck to the church every week. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't know if I had a specific idea or image of what I of like what I thought hell was going to be. Like I think the sense of it being a very spiritual um experience for me made it feel like it wasn't like a mythical world that was other. Like it was very
Yeah.
much still a part of the world that I was. Um and just took on a more like spiritual form, not like a specific Hollywood version of what hell was going to be.
Mine evolved. So, I mean, growing up, I mean, we would, I went to a Catholic grade school, and I should preface with too, I'm not knocking religion, I'm not knocking organized religion. It just, for me, it did not work. And, in terms of, I was very similar to you where I was like, I would zone off, zone out during church. I would start to look at the stained glass windows. And I remember the stained glass windows of hell were like terrifying. So it was like an 8-year-old sitting there for mass in grade school, like, your brain starts thinking like, oh, is this what it's really like? And then if you had like a visiting priest that was doing the homily that week, like who was a little bit more fire and brimstone than the typical parish one, like it was pretty scary. And so you're looking at these images of like physical pain, but then
Mm,
you would have teachers that would talk about in religion class how pain was something that we only experienced here. So, as a kid, even back then, you're questioning. You're like, well, what is this? And it wasn't until I was in high school, I wanted to say, and I started reading Dante, Alighieri, and
mhm,
reading the Inferno. That then I was like, oh, this makes a little bit more sense. Like not the pain aspect, but like the counter suffering. And if we did something really awful here, maybe the counter suffering is like, let the punishment fit the crime. And then I guess, to piggyback, I mean, as a medium, I mean, especially, if you're listening at home and you've never watched an episode before and listened to a podcast, we try to find parallels between the artists that I'm speaking with and my experience as a medium. And I can tell you, as a medium, I've never encountered a soul that said like, oh, it's pretty hot where I am. You know what I mean? Like I've never experienced somebody, where I've went, oh, maybe hell is a real thing. What I can tell you is from my experience, and this is, just mine. I mean, however, I've also heard other mediums that have very similar experiences. I do like to describe it as like a big old house. And when we get to the other side, some might have more free reign of the house based off of how we were here and how we treated people. And where, others that might have been really bad, not so good people might only have access to the foyer, so to speak. And then one of the things that I can't stress enough is, and it threw me for a loop when I first started reading people. I'm like, oh, there's like basically like work programs on the other side. So if you had somebody that was not a good person, many times they are paired up with another family member on the other side that helps them to rehabilitate, so to speak. And I know
mm,
for some, I know especially being here in the physical, it's a hard concept to grasp because I think our culture still very much values incarceration and punishment rather than rehabilitation. And
mhm,
there's times where there have been a couple times where I've seen somebody and I'm like, would this person have been maybe not the kindest, and would they have done some pretty yucky stuff? And um, for example, one that I'll never forget was I was like, were they part of like really bad organizations that would have been like racist? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, well, it's interesting. I'm like, what I can tell you now is that from the other side, they actually work on helping people of color and the very types of people they would have discriminated crossover. So it's
mm,
interesting. We're given very similar this idea of contrapasso with, Dante. And okay, if this is what we couldn't figure out here on, when we were here in the physical, we're going to be given tasks that will help us to still grow, because that's the tricky part. I always say is that There's no challenges really on the other side. I mean, the challenges are here, you know, humans working with other humans that have their own wants,
Yeah.
their own needs. So, and every so often, I can always tell if somebody is recently deceased and and it was for example, I would say about a year ago, I read someone, and if they are recently crossed, I mean, we're talking like a couple days to a week, they will appear like in a separate little holding room. And I remember I read these three sisters back to back, and I'm like, I have your mom here. And the mom, it was bizarre, Tim. The mom was just sitting in a chair like this, and she was like, I can't talk right now. And I'm like, is this making sense? And I'm like, did your mom take her own life? Because I kept feeling like, you know, the sledgehammer game you play at carnivals where you do this? My hand kept doing this, and I didn't know why. And the first sister was like, no, my mom just died in her sleep. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right. Second sister comes in, and they basically all covered for the mom. When I found out afterward that the mom had hanged herself, so that was the this gesture that I was getting. So
Oh wow.
when she was basically sitting in the chair, it was basically they were figuring out, okay, how do we take this soul that is hurting and how do we help rehabilitate her? So it's funny. After I ended up reading one of the sisters again, and when I got the mom the second time, it was a very different situation. She was like, I'm here with my mom. We're working in a garden. I'm working on helping children cross over that are, you know, killed in
Mm.
accidents. So, I know, long story short, if you're wondering what a medium believes in hell at home, it's not the pitchforks and the flames. It's very much like a rehabilitation on the other side. I guess if it's okay, can we segue into your reading? Because that was
Yeah.
what, a month, less than a month?
Yeah, I think about a month ago.
What did you make of it? Anything that you feel comfortable sharing? Because you'd never been read before, correct?
Never been read. Yeah, I definitely had my. I mean, going no further than like the anti-Catholic Catholic history that I came from, I had my doubts
Sure.
and hesitations about it, but I really wanted to, and I think that the spiritual side of me really like wanted to participate and see what this was all about. Um, I was like amazed by the accuracy. I was mostly amazed by like the feeling that was created. You know, like, I don't even know what happens for you individually, but I feel like being in touch with being a medium you must have a heightened sense of awareness or something that like that you tune into,
Yeah.
and I feel like I was able to like tap into something like that at the same time. And the same thing happened with my sister-in-law who just was read, that it's like after you feel like, you know, you feel like you get like pulled back into a reality and you're like, whoa, what was that? Like, what was that? Like that bubble that just existed. And I 100% believe it, that world can exist, and that the people in my life who came to speak to me were speaking to me. I mean, there was just too much that was accurate and spot on. And the crazy thing is, like, there's a couple of things during the reading that I was like, that doesn't really make sense to me. No, I don't know. I don't know if that really was true or something. Like one thing you said about my grandmother on my dad's side, you're like, I feel like she's like reading like trashy magazines, like like National
Yeah,
Enquirer or
the Star,
something.
the Inquirer.
Yeah, and I was like, no, that doesn't sound like her at all. She had a subscription. She had a subscription. Like I learned this later on. Like my aunt confirmed it,
Yeah.
um, which was crazy. And like another thing that was so amazing after was you're like, is somebody like a female sick in your family? Like somebody who was close to my mom's mom. You're like, because she was saying that my grandmother was saying that she was spending a lot of time with somebody who was sick. And I was like, not that I know of. Well, my cousin Mary, who's the first grandchild, who was very, very close with my grandmother, she had an emergency surgery like a week prior, and she had only told my mom about it. So I had like an hour-long conversation with my mom after my reading because there was a lot that was passed on to share with her.
Yeah.
And she told me about my cousin, and I was like, "Oh my God, that's crazy!" And she was very close to my grandma. And I finally, she randomly texted me a couple of days ago, and I was, oh, I think around Christmas, and I wrote back, and I was like, "Merry Christmas to you. Like, I heard about the surgery. I hope you're recovering really well." I was like, "I just wanted to let you know, like." I had a really interesting experience with the medium, and he told me this about grandma spending time with somebody close to her in the family who was going through some health emergencies or health crisis. And she's like, I have the chills. She was like, I specifically called on grandma to come help me through this, which is crazy. I mean, so there's like even the like the 10% doubt that I didn't know about has come in and continued to be amazing. And I mean, what's the word? Just calming.
Yeah.
Just eliminates that element of doubt. And you're never going to, I mean, talk about Hadestown, like you're never going to be able to eliminate that doubt entirely.
Sure.
But I feel like there's a lot less of it um, in my life now. And I feel like that is empowering somehow.
Yours was so neat in the sense that, like, oh gosh, and I always say, first off, you summed it up so beautifully. There is something that happens, and that's one of the other reasons why I start with a prayer, because you relax, and I'll feel it. Sometimes if somebody's nervous going in, feels like a little wall, and when I start the prayer and they see I know they know, I close my eyes, and all of a sudden I feel like a whoosh, and their energy, their wall comes down a little bit, and that doesn't mean that they're like, oh, I'm gonna overshare information. It just means like, okay, we feel safe about this. We feel good. Um, and it's a very real, it's funny. Somebody else said the same thing to me. They're like, I feel like after the reading, like the bubble pops and we go back to reality and we're like, what the frig just happened? And
Hmm.
then that rational part of our brain wants to pick it apart and go, okay, that's not valid because, and then that's the beauty of it, is that there are moments like when I told you about the Inquirer or the Star, and you're like, no, I'm like, okay, and I'm never going to disagree with somebody because I never want to be that medium that will just goes, well, I'm right, and that's not the way to go about it. So, but I
Hmm.
also know it's not my job to unpack your experience. So I always just say, and I think I even told you, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna leave it here, is what I say. I'm gonna put it in the corner, and maybe it'll make sense later. You know.
And I did the same thing. Like I put it in my notes, and then
Oh yeah, because you wrote.
yeah, and I had a bunch of question marks. Oh my God, another one. Here's another one.
What?
You said night vision in a woman, like somebody's night vision was, and um, m- they were like recently, like they need to get it checked. And my sister had just taken like a road trip back a couple days prior, and it got dark earlier than she expected. And she was like, "I will never do this again because I realize my vision is
Night
going,
vision.
my night vision is going when I'm driving." And
Crazy.
I was like, "Oh my God."
Because here's
There
the
was
thing, like,
like,
I don't understand either why I'm saying it at that moment. And
yeah.
I don't. Sometimes I'm like, look. Sometimes people will go, well, are you just trying to, or do mediums just try to drum up business by going, I've got a message for mom here and your cousin? No, it's literally the fact that like our family members love us so much, they don't want to talk to just us. They want to share other, I mean, and it's not that they couldn't just talk to us for an hour, but they also love, our siblings. They love our mom, and they want to share these things. And
Mhm.
it's funny. I mean, even the way I wrote things down, I mean, if it's okay, and if it's not, we can omit this part. But I remember I started writing down initials or excuse me, I thought I was writing out the start of your father's name, and I'm like,
Yeah.
this doesn't feel like his name though, because I kept hearing, like when I would write it, I would get the green arrow, like the emoji, which meant correct, but then I would hear that, and I'm like, I don't know what this is. And I remember when I said, did his name start with like this? And you're like, no, but those are his initials. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, you're like, you said, "Who's the MA?" And I was like,
Mm,
"Oh, that's my dad."
yeah.
I mean, everything that was said about my dad was spot on. I mean, even the like interesting when I re-listened to the audio, um, talking about like he said something about my mother about giving her a trophy, and like even trophies is very specific to my dad. Like my dad had like a box of trophies. He was an athlete of that time. Like even that word felt very connected to him. In and it like rang truer the second time when I replayed it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the you said, "Who's the MA?" And I was like, "Oh, that's my dad's. Those are my dad's initials." And then he kept saying he was like, "He's not saying he's with you. He keeps saying that he's on
On
you."
you.
Yeah, and I have my dad's initials tattooed on my shoulder, which was, I
Crazy.
mean, amazing. Yeah.
He had me up so early. Because it's funny. It's not like the movie Ghost where they follow you everywhere and they're like the 99 bottles of it, but they will get me up. So if it's a morning for me to let the dogs out, because we alternate because they're like demons, they get up so early for food. He was like 6 a.m. He was like, okay, you're ready to go for today? Are you ready to go? Are you ready? I'm like, who is this? And then he kept going, dad, 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 dad. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I promise you it's going to be beautiful. I'm like, I just need a little bit more sleep. So no, he was a joy, and it's neat. I didn't think about the trophy thing either. He shows me, they show us things and we relay it, and they kind of trust that we will very much like, like I'm assuming you can relate to it with a character, that we're going to take that character, what we know about them, and speak in their language, as best as we can, as embody them
Yeah.
as best as we can, because that's where the beauty of it comes out. Is, are we embodying, does the personality shine through? Because you might have a piece of evidential information that's great, but like, you really want to capture that personality too. And if they were super goofy, you don't want to say that, you don't want to read them as strict. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
it's a dance.
You
Go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you like really captured the dryness of one of my aunts, like to a T. And you were like, she keeps saying, it just doesn't make sense. And you kind of like embodied her in the moment. And I was like, oh my God, that looks just like that's the exact delivery she would have given.
Yeah. Another part of the reading that I would love to talk to you about, if it's okay, is we had a spirit come through, and I had no clue who they were to you, but I had no idea that I was tapping on a pretty high profile case of killings. Do you want to, if you can talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And there's a handful of history that I like haven't even shared with you about it. But when I first was interested in even having being read by you, um, I'm trying to think what came first. Okay, so the first thing that you had said when we decided to do it was like take the time in this next week to invite
Yes.
people who you want to be there. And I was very exclusive with my invitations. Like, so
Timothy
I was
Hughes
very
cordially invites you to this reading.
just designing full invites. No, but I was like very specific. I wanted to be very specific with who I was like sending messages out to or energy out to. And one that I didn't feel like was it didn't feel like intentional, was an old friend from childhood, and it felt like there was an invitation there that was like kind of out of my control a little bit. Like it was just like kind
Mhm.
of being thrust upon me, which I felt very weird about. Like I was like, "Oh, this," because there is all this mystery around his death, um, but it kept popping up. Like I was like, "Okay, okay, well, let's invite him there as well." And then I was doing some research of my own, like what I was going to experience. And one of the first things that popped up for mediums online was about a mother who met with a medium whose son was died in a very similar mysterious way, connected to the same like serial killers.
Sure.
that are swirling around the mystery of my friend. And I was like, well, that's weird. Like that's the one video that I watched. Um, and when my friend came into our session, um, there were a lot. I went back and watched. There's a lot of similar things that were said, like from that medium and to
Really?
you, about the specifics of the cases. And there's a whole other special on like the Oxygen channel or something that I've never brought myself to watch.
Sure.
Um, and when I was relaying the information that came out in our session, my brother and another dear friend of mine from high school who like have just stayed up to date with all the information were saying like all of that
Oh, wow.
is part of like all of that is part of the mystery. Things that wasn't even aware of. So that was crazy. I mean, that was really, really crazy. Like that whole period of time, because it you got into a groove that was like just throwing things out. Like it felt like it was coming at you very quickly,
It was.
and there was like a lot of information. And like that's when I wrote the most because it wasn't like there was nothing general. It was like very, very specific things, and there's all this mystery around a car
Oh, yeah.
that came up in the session that only now comes up in they have like a private investigator who has brought it up, that has connected with through dogs like to the possibility that his DNA was in a certain car that could have been something that transported the body.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about any of that. Um,
Because I remember
so when you,
asking you, and you're like, I'm not too sure at this time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but that's for sure, like,
Crazy.
all a part of it. And the other, like, weird coincidence, which is, no longer a coincidence, the other weird element of it is my dear friend who I spoke to, she had, gone to see a medium a couple years ago, and a lot of the same and she, like, ran to her room, and she pulled out the notes, and we were on the phone, and we have a lot of the same notes
Really?
from yeah, from our friend who mysteriously died.
And it's interesting to note too. I mean, and I'm not going to go into detail about him, but I do remember when I first got him, I couldn't make out the gender. And this is a very common thing that sometimes people will ask is like, well, what do you mean you don't know if it's a guy or a girl? Sometimes, I mean, women can have short, hair. I also on the other side. And I remember I got the connecting letter. I remember I got the first letter of their name. And, to go off of what you had mentioned about the similar details to other mediums, that's also why mediums are able to train other mediums. So when I trained at Lilydale, probably about almost 10 years ago, I was with a group of like 10 of us. And then what's neat is that we can kind of tap into, for example, two mediums could read, like I could have another medium next to me and we could read you at the same time. And that's why mediums are able to teach others, because we can both tap into the same spirit simultaneously, but based off of our personalities, we're going to get different facets. So it's like looking
Mm,
at the same picture, but you might be looking at the Mona Lisa at a museum. If your friend is more well versed in history as a medium, they're going to be getting more of these notes, where I might be getting more of the artistic notes of the painting. So we all pick
mm,
up on different things, but the messages are almost always, you know, the same. I always say if you know how to read a book, you know what I mean, or read a piece of sheet music, somebody's going to perform it differently, but it should still sound the same. So,
mm.
well, I want to thank you for coming on. We're going to wrap up with some rapid fire. I could talk to you all day and just pick your brain.
I
I mean, it
know, I know. I want to thank you. Like, I want to thank you for the session, for
was my honor.
this experience. Like, it just has been so um, unique. It's been like people are like, "Well, are you glad you did it?" I'm so glad that I did it,
Good.
and I don't even know like if I can articulate yet how that will affect me moving forward. But I do think that like there is a like I said, and a percentage and elements of doubt
Sure.
that are eliminated. And I do think that in general feels very empowering.
That's you're a genius because you use all the words that you describe things the way I do. I always say the same thing. It should feel empowering leaving a reading. You should never leave going, well, I feel worse about my lot. I feel like there is no hope for me. It should always be like the reading equivalent of like You'll Never Walk Alone, from Carousel. You're like, okay, I've got like a spiritual mafia with me on the other side now that is looking out for me. I have spiritual agents, that won't take 10% of my pay or whatever it is. They're looking out for me. They want what's best for me, on the other side. And it's just my job to read those, to read that energy, to tap into that frequency and relay it. So,
yeah.
If you were stuck as a ghost in a theater and could only watch the same show over and over, what would it be? Musical. It has to be a musical.
I mean, I'm going to say my own show. I'm lucky enough to say my own show.
I'm absolutely going to say Hadestown.
I'm saying, yeah.
And I can't wait to see what they do with it on the road, because I want to know what they're going to do with the drum, and how they're going to...
It was I know that it was a big question and a big concern. And if anybody can tackle it, it's Rachel.
I can't wait to see all these amateur high school productions. They're going to be cutting holes in their floor. And then just it's going to be coming up. It's going to be on the bloopers gone wrong. The musical theater fails, and you'll just see somebody fly through a hole and claw their way back out. And the high school audience just goes wild. And I'm ready for it. Character who would benefit, character that you've played, or just a character that you're drawn to that would benefit from having seen a medium.
I'm gonna say Elsa.
Oh, that's a good one. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Elsa could benefit from one. I feel like, yeah. Well, yeah. If you
either of them, either of the sisters.
Yeah,
Elsa or Anna.
I feel like Anna could use it, because Anna's probably like, what the F is going on? Like, why won't my sister talk to me? And she also, a medium would call that shit right out of going, this person's bad for you. This person's after the throne or the kingdom. So get the hell out of here, Anna. They're going to lock you up. And a medium would definitely help them with their romantic issues. So yeah, and maybe tell Elsa, when she's got some love coming her way. So
yeah, and Elsa needs that army of spirits behind her. She needs to know that she's not alone.
She does. If you could go back in time and originate a part on Broadway that made somebody else super famous, what part would it be?
The MC in Cabaret.
Yes. Though I feel like people are going to look back on you, and because I think of that image of Joel Grey, that, but now, years from now, somebody's going to come and think of you. Look at that image that Matthew Murphy took of the side image with the muscle. That's going to be somebody's Joel Grey one day. So I guarantee you, with that, bajillion years from now, when none of us are here, how would you want somebody to look back and remember Tim Hughes?
Oh gosh, well, that photo is going to be a great memory.
Aesthetic aside, personality.
I do think I do. We talked about this, I think, before this began, but the flag snatch that happened at Frozen is I always say, if I had to put together a 4 to 5 second clip of all things that I wanted, that I think helped make me, and that I think I would want to be remembered for, it's being bowing on a Broadway stage in a otherworldly, super cool character, and then standing up and trusting my instincts in that moment, and that it also happens to be politically motivated, in an action that I took to kind of protect my company and this sanctity of theater and what a curtain call means. I think all of those things are wrapped up in that weird moment, and all things that I would love to be remembered for.
Well, yeah. I want to thank you so much for being my guest today. This was a real honor. I wish you nothing but the best of good health, happiness, and a Broadway coming back bigger and brighter than ever in 2021. So thank you
Hey,
again.
same to you. Same to you. It's so nice to have met you.
You as well. I'll see you soon.
See you soon. See you at the stage door.
Yes, stage door. Bye-bye.